They left me stranded in a wheelchair after brain surgery, calling it minor medical issues. But Dr. Martinez, my surgeon and the CEO's wife, had documented every cruel moment. When Dad bragged about family values at his promotion event, she destroyed him publicly. Hi, I'm Jessica, and I'm 29 years old. 2 months ago, my family abandoned me at the hospital after my life-threatening brain surgery. My parents said they were too busy, and my sister claimed she had better things to do than pick me up. They left me sitting in a wheelchair at discharge with no ride home, still dizzy and disoriented from the procedure. But what my family didn't know was that the surgeon who saved my life happened to be married to the CEO of my father's company, and when Dr. Martinez saw how they treated me, she decided to have a very interesting conversation with her husband about Dad's upcoming promotion to regional director. The stakes? My father was about to lose his $200,000 executive position and his entire career, all because they couldn't spare 2 hours to help their daughter after brain surgery. Before I tell you how their world came crashing down, like this video and subscribe. And tell me where you're watching from in the comments below. The hospital abandonment was the culmination of a lifetime of being the family afterthought. I sat in that wheelchair for 3 hours, calling family member after family member, watching other patients get picked up by loved ones who actually cared. When I finally reached my mom, she sighed and said, "Jessica, can't you just take an Uber? Your father has a golf tournament, and Sarah's at brunch with her friends." The nurse looked horrified apparently. No one had ever been abandoned at discharge from brain surgery before. But this wasn't new behavior. Growing up, our Aunt Linda was the only family member who consistently saw the cruel favoritism my parents showed my younger sister Sarah. When I was valedictorian of my high school class, my parents skipped graduation because Sarah had a cheerleading practice. Aunt Linda drove 4 hours to be there, tears in her eyes as I walked across that stage alone. "Jessica," she told me afterward, "you're going to do incredible things, and someday they'll realize what they lost. But by then, it'll be too late." In college, the disparity became even more obvious. When Sarah barely graduated with a 2.3 gigapascals, my parents threw her a massive celebration party and bought her a brand new Mercedes as a reward for finishing. When I graduated summa cum laude with my engineering degree, they sent a text saying, "Congratulations," and asked if I could help pay for Sarah's post-graduation Europe trip. Aunt Linda secretly sent me $5,000 and a card that said, "For the brilliant woman who deserves celebration, even when others are too blind to see it." The medical neglect pattern started early too. When Sarah broke her arm playing volleyball in high school, both parents rushed to the hospital, stayed overnight, and hired a private nurse for her recovery. When I was hospitalized for pneumonia my freshman year of college, they didn't even visit, claiming it was just a cold and they couldn't miss work. Aunt Linda drove through a snowstorm to bring me soup and advocate with the doctors when my condition worsened. The breaking point came 6 months ago when I was diagnosed with the brain tumor. The specialist recommended immediate surgery, warning that delays could cause permanent damage or death. When I called to tell my family, my mother's response was, "Well, that's inconvenient timing with Sarah's wedding planning." My father added, "Can't you schedule it for after the holidays? We're too busy right now." Aunt Linda, who had been battling her own cancer, immediately said, "I'll be there for every appointment, sweetheart. Family doesn't abandon family in crisis." But Aunt Linda passed away just 3 weeks before my surgery date, leaving me facing the most terrifying experience of my life completely alone. Her final words to me were prophetic. "Jessica, I'm leaving you something special in my will, not just money, but connections." The Martinez family were my closest friends for 40 years. Remember that name when you need advocates who understand what real family looks like. I didn't understand what she meant until Dr. Elena Martinez introduced herself as my neurosurgeon. She mentioned knowing Aunt Linda and how Linda had spoken about her brilliant niece who deserved so much better from her family. Dr. Martinez promised she'd take excellent care of me and that Aunt Linda's memory would be honored through my healing. For the first time in months, I felt like someone actually cared whether I lived or died. My secret weapon came from Aunt Linda's final gift, a detailed letter explaining her 40-year friendship with the Martinez family, complete with documentation of every instance my family had mistreated me that she'd witnessed. She'd been keeping a record, knowing someday I'd need allies who could see the truth. But more importantly, Dr. Elena Martinez wasn't just my surgeon, she was married to Carlos Martinez, the CEO of Davidson Industries, where my father had worked for 15 years. Dr. Martinez had witnessed firsthand how my family treated me throughout my medical crisis. During pre-surgery consultations, she'd seen my parents dismiss my fears, skip appointments, and complain about the inconvenience of my tumor. She'd watched me break down alone in her office, terrified and unsupported. Elena believed in family loyalty and had been disgusted by their behavior long before the hospital abandonment. 3 days after my discharge fiasco, Elena and I met at Aunt Linda's favorite coffee shop to review the evidence Aunt Linda had compiled. "Your aunt documented everything," Elena said, sliding a folder across the table. "Every graduation they missed, every hospital visit they skipped, every time they chose your sister. Over you." She also included character references from teachers, professors, and colleagues who witnessed their favoritism. Elena's motivation was crystal clear. She'd watched her own parents sacrifice everything for her education and career, and my family's treatment of me violated everything she believed about parental love. "Carlos has been watching your father for months," she revealed. "Dad's been lobbying hard for that regional director promotion, constantly bragging about his perfect family values and how family always comes first in his household. We planned the perfect confrontation." My father's promotion announcement was scheduled for the company's annual leadership gala, a black tie event where spouses, family, and board members would celebrate his career advancement. My parents had specifically told me not to attend, claiming I'd be too embarrassing so soon after surgery. Elena would attend as Carlos's wife, armed with the full documentation of my family's neglect. "They're going to humiliate you one more time," Elena predicted, "probably in front of Carlos and the entire leadership team. They'll paint themselves as devoted parents while subtly putting you down. That's when I reveal what kind of family values they really demonstrate." Elena showed me the final piece of Aunt Linda's gift, a video message she'd recorded weeks before her death, explaining everything she'd witnessed and why she'd connected me with the Martinez family. "Sometimes," Aunt Linda said in the recording, "justice requires witnesses who can't be silenced or dismissed." The final insult came at Dad's promotion gala 2 weeks later. Against their wishes, I attended the company event, still dealing with post-surgery fatigue but determined to show support for the family that had abandoned me. I wore my best dress and arrived hoping maybe, just maybe, they'd acknowledge what I'd been through and include me in their celebration. Instead, Dad used me as a prop in his acceptance speech. "Leadership means making tough decisions about priorities," he announced to the room full of executives and their families. "Sometimes you have to focus on what matters most. My daughter Jessica recently had some minor medical issues, but we knew she was strong enough to handle it independently. That's how we raised her self-sufficient and resilient." The room applauded as Dad gestured toward me with a patronizing smile. "Jessica understands that family means supporting each other's success, not being a burden during important career moments. She's learned to manage her own challenges so the rest of us can focus on achievements that benefit the whole family." Mom nodded approvingly and added, "We're proud that Jessica didn't let her little surgery become a drama that derailed her father's promotion timeline. Some families let medical issues become everyone else's problem, but we've taught our daughters to be independent." Carlos Martinez looked genuinely confused, leaning toward Elena with a concerned expression. Several colleagues shifted uncomfortably apparently, referring to brain surgery as minor medical issues and little surgery struck them as odd. But my parents were just getting started with their character assassination. "The truth is," Dad continued, "coddling children when they have health problems just makes them weak and dependent. Jessica's learning to solve her own problems instead of expecting constant attention and sympathy. That's the kind of strong family values that make great leaders." I felt Elena's eyes on me from across the room, where she sat with Carlos and the other executive spouses. The humiliation was complete. They'd turned my life-threatening surgery into evidence of their superior parenting. That's when I realized they'd never change, never acknowledge their cruelty, never see me as anything more than an inconvenience. That's when Elena stood up and asked to address the room about family values and leadership. "If you believe that karma is real, type justice in the comments. Now, let me tell you how the trap was sprung." Elena rose gracefully from her table, commanding immediate attention as Carlos's wife and a respected surgeon in the community. "If I may," she said with professional authority, "I'd like to share some thoughts on family values and leadership since it seems to be tonight's theme." Dad beamed, assuming she was about to praise his parenting philosophy. "Of course, Dr. Martinez, We'd love to hear your perspective on raising strong, independent children. Elena smiled coldly. Well, Mr. Patterson, as a neurosurgeon who recently treated your daughter Jessica, I have a unique perspective on your family's approach to medical crises. The room went silent as Elena's words registered. Dad's face began to change as he realized where this was heading. You see, ladies and gentlemen, Jessica didn't have minor medical issues or little surgery, Elena continued, her voice carrying across the stunned room. She had a life-threatening brain tumor that required immediate surgical intervention. The delay of even a few weeks could have caused permanent neurological damage or death. Carlos stood slowly, his expression shifting from confusion to disgust as he began to understand. Mrs. Chen, the board chairman's wife, gasped audibly. Wait, you're saying Jessica had brain surgery, and they called it minor medical issues? Elena nodded gravely. Stage 2 glioma requiring craniotomy with a wake mapping to preserve language function. Jessica was terrified, facing the possibility of losing her ability to speak, work, or live independently. And her family's response was to complain about the timing interfering with social events. The room erupted in shocked murmurs as Elena pulled out her phone. But that's not even the worst part. Jessica was abandoned at hospital discharge, left alone in a wheelchair, dizzy and disoriented from brain surgery, because her family was too busy, with golf and brunch, to pick her up. Dad tried desperately to regain control. Now wait a minute, Dr. Martinez, you're taking this out of context. We taught Jessica to be self-reliant and self-reliant? Elena's voice cut through his excuses like a scalpel. Mr. Patterson, I have security footage from the hospital showing Jessica sitting alone in that wheelchair for 3 hours, calling family member after family member, begging for a ride home from brain surgery. Would you like me to share that with your colleagues? Carlos's face had gone completely white. Elena, are you telling me that this man abandoned his daughter after brain surgery while lobbying me for a promotion based on his family values? Elena projected a photo on the room's screen, me sitting alone in the hospital wheelchair, clearly disoriented and distressed. This was taken 4 hours post-surgery. Jessica's family knew she was being discharged. They chose not to come. Mrs. Chen stood up, her voice shaking with anger. This is absolutely horrific. How could any parent do this to their child? That's when Elena delivered the devastating blow. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to meet someone who knew the Patterson family very well. She gestured toward the screen, which now showed Aunt Linda's final video message. Aunt Linda's voice filled the room. If you're seeing this, it means Jessica needed advocates who could speak truth about her family. For 25 years, I watched this brilliant girl be treated as an afterthought, while her mediocre sister received every advantage. I documented it all because I knew someday someone would need to see the truth. The video showed photographs of every milestone my family had missed, every hospital stay I'd faced alone, every achievement they'd ignored while celebrating Sarah's mediocrity. Carlos and the entire room watched in horror as the pattern of neglect became undeniable. This promotion, Elena announced, was supposed to go to a man who demonstrates family values and leadership. Instead, you're looking at someone who abandoned his daughter after life-threatening surgery because golf was more important. Carlos stood and addressed the room with quiet fury. Ladies and gentlemen, there will be no promotion tonight. Mr. Patterson, please see me in my office Monday morning. We need to discuss whether Davidson Industries employs people who abandon family members in medical crises. The aftermath was swift and merciless. Within minutes of Elena's revelation, Carlos publicly announced that Dad's promotion was permanently rescinded. Davidson Industries promotes leaders who demonstrate integrity in all aspects of life, he declared. Abandoning a daughter after brain surgery is not the character we want representing our company. The other executives and their spouses formed a protective circle around me, expressing horror at my family's treatment and admiration for my strength. Mrs. Chen, whose own daughter was a doctor, hugged me tightly and whispered, "Sweetheart, you deserve so much better than this. What they did is unforgivable." My parents stood frozen as their professional and social networks crumbled before their eyes. Dad's colleagues, who had respected him for years, now looked at him with disgust and disbelief. Mom's carefully cultivated image as the perfect corporate wife evaporated as people realized she'd participated in abandoning her daughter after surgery. Elena approached me with calm authority. "Jessica, I've arranged for you to stay with Carlos and me until you're fully recovered. You shouldn't be alone during your healing process. She handed me a folder containing all of Aunt Linda's documentation and added, "Your aunt wanted you to have this when you were strong enough to use it." Security discreetly escorted my parents from the event as other attendees shared videos of the confrontation on social media. The hashtag number brain surgery abandonment began trending within hours, turning their cruelty into a cautionary tale about toxic family dynamics. Carlos made his final announcement of the evening. The regional director position will go to someone who understands that true leadership starts with how you treat the most vulnerable people in your life. Mr. Patterson has demonstrated he lacks this fundamental quality. I remained composed throughout the chaos, finally understanding what Aunt Linda meant about justice requiring the right witnesses. This isn't about revenge, I told the supportive crowd surrounding me. This is about accountability. Some people confuse enabling cruelty with being family. Dad's downfall cascaded through every aspect of their lives over the following months. Without the promotion, he couldn't afford the lifestyle my parents had been building toward, and his reputation at Davidson Industries was permanently destroyed. Colleagues who had once respected him now avoided him, knowing he was the executive who abandoned his daughter after brain surgery. His career stagnated as word spread through their professional network. Mom's social circle evaporated overnight as other corporate wives distanced themselves from someone who could participate in such cruelty. The country club memberships, charity board positions, and exclusive social events that had defined her identity became inaccessible as people questioned her character. Her carefully curated image as a devoted mother became a public joke. Sarah, who had always been the golden child, found herself guilt-ridden and defensive as people questioned how she could have participated in abandoning her sister. Her wedding planning became awkward as vendors and guests learned about the family's treatment of me. Several relatives, inspired by Elena's courage, publicly condemned their behavior and chose not to attend Sarah's wedding. Meanwhile, my life transformed in ways I never could have imagined. Living with Elena and Carlos during my recovery, I experienced what real family revengestory support looked like: people who checked on my healing, celebrated my progress, and treated my well-being as genuinely important. Elena became not just my surgeon but a true mentor who understood the value of chosen family. Carlos offered me a position at Davidson Industries in their engineering division, recognizing talent that my own family had never acknowledged. "We need leaders who understand resilience and integrity," he said. "Your strength through this ordeal shows exactly the character we value." My career flourished under leadership that actually saw my potential. But the most meaningful transformation came when I used my signing bonus to establish the Linda Patterson Memorial Fund for patients facing major surgeries without family support. Elena helped me create a program providing transportation, advocacy, and emotional support for people abandoned by their families during medical crises. I converted Aunt Linda's house into a recovery residence for surgery patients who needed temporary housing and care. The first resident was a young man whose family had disowned him, someone Aunt Linda would have welcomed with open arms. Every morning, I'd tend to her garden and feel her presence guiding me toward healing others who'd been abandoned. My parents eventually tried to reconcile, sending awkward emails about misunderstandings and wanting to work things out. But some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt with hollow apologies. I remained cordial but distant, focusing on the family I'd chosen: Elena, Carlos, my recovery residents, and the memory of the one person who'd always seen my worth. The brain surgery that was supposed to be my family's inconvenience became the catalyst for finding my true purpose, showing other abandoned people that healing is possible and real family is about choice, not blood. Looking back, this was never about destroying my parents. It was about revealing who they really were when it mattered most. They spent so much energy maintaining appearances that they forgot the most basic requirement of being human: showing up for people who need you. The best revenge isn't calculated, it's simply living well despite those who failed you. Aunt Linda taught me that real family doesn't abandon you in crisis, they show up, advocate, and love you through the hardest moments. My parents' cruelty wasn't my failure, it was theirs, and it took a stranger's compassion to show me the difference. Brain surgery taught me that life is fragile and precious, but it also revealed who deserves access to your healing journey. Some people earn the right to witness your recovery, and others forfeit that privilege through their choices. Family isn't always blood. If this story resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to be reminded of their strength. Subscribe for more stories about taking back your power, and remember, The people who show up in your worst moments are your real family.